and John Grinder started kind of modelling how different people do things. They modelled how Milton Erickson, brilliant hypnotist, got fantastic results. They would kind of model how he did his stuff, how he did his sessions, how he got the results. And they did that by analysing transcript after transcript after transcript, modelling reports about what he did, reading as much as they could. They modelled the work of Virginia Satir, brilliant family therapist. Again, modelling it, figuring out how does she get the results, how does she do what she does, what are the things she does in order to get the results that she gets. Because when you do the same things that someone else does, you're going to get similar results to what they get, right? That makes sense. Okay, you're not necessarily going to get the exact same results because you've got different circumstances, but you're going to get similar results, or at least it's going to get you along the way to getting those results. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. So they did this. In the process, they created a thing called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. A fundamental part of neuro-linguistic programming is all about modelling. And they used that, it was used in, for example, military schools would use that when training marksmen how to shoot. They would actually get someone, their top marksman, the best one in the country, best one they could find, have them at the firing range doing what they do best, firing. And they would have someone who would be asking them every single step of the way, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? What's the next thing that you do? Why do you do it that way? What's the next thing you do? And basically analysing every single component of it. They would analyse all of that, or model it, for want of a better word. And when they did that, and used that to construct the training of the new recruits, they found that those recruits had a much higher success rate. They were much, much better marksmen, much more quickly than other recruits were through conventional training and practice. Why? Because they'd modelled the best of the best. They'd analysed how the best of the best did what they did. They'd analysed how they got the results. They'd kind of got, if you like, the recipe, and they then taught that to the new recruits. The new recruits learned exactly how the best of the best did it. Started doing that particular way, and they got great results. Modelling is used in so many different areas. It's used a lot in personal development. It's used a lot in business coaching. I use it when I'm helping clients with confidence. We use either direct modelling, or we use the results of modelling. A lot of the tools I use are based on the results of modelling successful people, seeing how they do these things, etc. It's a very, very key component. So let's talk about how we might go about modelling confidence. Obviously, the best way is if you can actually be with the person whilst they're doing whatever it is they're doing and ask questions, note what they're doing every step of the way. But it's hard enough getting into kitchen with chef to be able to do that. You ain't going to be able to do that with, say, your film idol or top actor and on the stage, treading the board in theatre. While they're doing the performance, they're not really going to want you stood next to them and say, why are you doing that? Why are you doing it this way? What's next? It's like, get out! Or somebody who's getting ready to deliver a fantastic talk and who holds the audience in the palm of their hands the whole way through. They're not going to want you asking the questions every step of the way. Why did you pause for that long? How did you know it was the right time to pause? How did you know it was time to start? What was the best? Get out. They're not going to do that. But there are certainly ways you can model. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the kind of like the third portion of this episode. So we've kind of given an introduction to modelling, using recipes as the metaphor for it, but it's all confidence. So that was the first section. The third section, we're going to talk about how we would model confidence and model confident people. But in this next section, the second section, I want to talk about what things it is that we would model. What would we model? What kind of things are we going to be looking for? Because there's so I mean, recipes for cooking are one thing. But when it comes to modelling people's behaviours, performance, particularly with something like confidence, especially with something as fundamental and as complex and rich as confidence, there's a lot to it. There are a huge number of components. So, before we get into how we would actually model them, let's take a look at what kind of things it is we're going to want to model, right? Because if you don't know what things you want to be looking out for, you could end up with masses of notes that bear no relation to what you're actually getting. It would be, to go back to the cooking analogy, if you had never cooked in your life, you knew nothing about cooking, about kitchens, about kitchen equipment, about food, if you knew nothing about any of that, and you got into the kitchen with chef and were noting down everything they did, how would you know what things were important to note, and how would you know what things were not important? You could end up modelling how they open the door and how they get the kitchen scales out, for example, because you wouldn't know any different. You wouldn't know that's not a key part of the recipe. You're observing everything that they do, and you don't know about cooking, so you could end up observing and modelling all of that stuff. You could even be counting the number of steps they take from one part of the kitchen to the next. Now, I know that sounds silly because we know that that's nothing to do with cooking, but if you knew nothing about cooking, if you didn't know what you were looking for in the recipe, it's exactly the sorts of things you might end up recording and modelling. And that happens even with professionals when they're doing modelling. Some of the I'll give you a quick example from in hypnosis. The colour purple is very strongly associated with hypnosis and with hypnotism. Even to the extent that even to this day, a lot of hypnotists will use purple, or they will incorporate purple in some way. Some of it, sometimes they'll do it just because it's kind of symbolic and it's because it's representative of hypnosis. But it all comes from the fact that at one point, the colour purple was thought to be an important aspect of it. Why was that? Well, it was when they were modelling Milton Erickson, a brilliant hypnotist. We'll talk more about him at another time. But just for now, he was a brilliant hypnotist, got amazing results. One of the things about Milton Erickson, he always wore purple. He was actually wheelchair bound. So he's in a wheelchair and he always wore purple in his suits and his outfits. He basically, to make life easier, had this wardrobe filled with multiple copies of the same suits. It was much easier to get dressed. You didn't have to choose what to get dressed each day. But purple was very much part of it. He always wore purple. So, in the early attempts at modelling him to get the stunning results he got, they even included wearing purple as part of what was modelled, such that wearing purple was considered to be one of the requirements for getting successful hypnosis results. Now, we know these days that is irrelevant. The colour is irrelevant, but only because we know more about hypnosis these days. At the time when they were modelling him, they didn't quite know what they were looking for, so they modelled everything. There were even some who were trying to replicate his results would insist on delivering hypnosis from a wheelchair whilst dressed in purple, because that's what he did. Now, we know that that's not necessary. But you see what I mean? If you don't know what you're looking to model, you're going to be modelling everything, including the things that are not necessarily right. When they modelled Milton Erickson, they thought wearing purple and perhaps even being in a wheelchair was part of what made his stuff work. If you know nothing about cooking and you're modelling the chef to get the recipe, you might even think the way the chef dresses, the way they get the equipment out of the drawers, might be an important part of it. And when you're attempting to model somebody's confidence, if you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to be bringing in a whole lot of stuff which is completely irrelevant, and possibly missing a lot of stuff that is relevant. So let's kind of take a look at the sorts of things that we're going to want to look at to model. Does that make sense? Yeah? You still with me? Fantastic. So, what are the sorts of things that we're going to want to model when it comes to confidence? I seem to have found a squeaky floorboard in here. I'm sorry about that. I shall rearrange things for next time. Next time I record here, I'll shuffle things around a bit so I don't have squeaky floorboard. Anyway, we shall persevere. We shall persevere. So, what sorts of things are we going to look to model when we're modelling people? We've given a little bit about this before. We've kind of touched on this in one or two previous episodes. Now's the time to go into much more detail about it. Because a lot of this stuff is all about our perception of the world, how we interact with the world. Yeah? Because we have things, I'll just touch on this bit very briefly. We have a thing called an ESA loop, ESA. Our emotion drives our physiological state, which drives the actions, which drives the emotions, which drives our state, which drives our actions. It's kind of like a continual loop. Okay? And part of what feeds into this loop is how we experience the outside world. Now we experience it through our senses. We talk predominantly about the 5 senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. There are, of course, many other senses. I mean, we've got like sense of balance and all sorts of other senses. But the key ones for this sort of stuff are sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. Smell and taste are less involved, less important, but they can still play a part. But then the main ones are sight, sound, and touch, or to give them the technical terms, because hey, we like using technical terms. Visual for sight, auditory for sound, and kinesthetic for touch. Okay? Or feeling. And we also have a thing called auditory digital, which is basically, when you're talking to yourself, you maybe going through a list in your head, going, right, I've got to do this, and this, and you're saying these things to yourself inside your head. That's kind of what we call auditory digital, or self-talk. You'll know the thing. I mean, when you come across the voice in your head. Shall I do this? Shall I do that? Am I going to be able to do that? Should I do this first? That's all self-talk, auditory digital we call it. There's a whole load of other of these. They're called modalities and submodalities. We don't need to know those. We don't need to know those at this point. I mean, if you ever do freedom technology training with me, NLP, hypnosis, and all those sorts of things, we'll go into a lot more detail on those. But for what we're doing here, we just need to know about visual, auditory, kinesthetic, auditory digital. But so that's kind of how we experience the world. But see, here's the thing. When through our senses, we are bombarded with typically 2 million bits of information every second. 2 million bits of information every second. That's a lot of information, right? Our unconscious takes all, brings all this in, so it all comes in to the unconscious. Our conscious, the bit that we think of, our awareness, the bit with which we are aware, that can only handle around 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information at any one time. That's equivalent to about 134 bits, give or take, of information. So we've got 2 million bits coming in. We can only consciously handle 134 bits, give or take. That's a lot of stuff. That's a big mismatch, right? We have a lot of internal filters which filter out all of this other information. Now, what do I mean by chunk of information? It's like, if you try and remember a string of random digits, you'll remember about 7 plus or minus 2 digits. After that, you kind of lose it, because each one of those is a chunk of information. Once you associate those together as a phone number, like 018118055, for example, that's 1 bit of information. Not 1 bit. That becomes 1 chunk of information, because it's kind of all linked together as one string. So a chunk of information depends how high level or how detailed we're looking. And again, we can talk about this another time. But the key thing is, we got this much information coming in, and we can only handle this much information. So we've got lots of filters that are filtering everything that's coming in through our senses, so that only the things that are important and relevant to us make their way into our conscious, for us to then process and deal with them and be aware of. I can give a